The twin sons of Kepler, 442b, were setting behind the crystalline peaks when Sergeant Jake Morrison's day went from routine patrol to cosmic comedy hour. He'd been walking the perimeter of Mining Station Echo 7 for the better part of 3 hours, his boots crunching against the iridescent sand that made this backwater colony look like someone had spilled glitter across an entire planet. The monotony was almost therapeutic after 18 months of what the recruitment brochures had euphemistically called frontier service opportunities. His comm unit crackled to life with the familiar voice of Lieutenant Rodriguez, whose idea of motivational leadership involved creative combinations of profanity and coffee-fueled threats. "Morrison, you seeing anything interesting out there, or are you just taking a scenic stroll through paradise?" Jake adjusted his plasma rifle and squinted at the horizon where strange rock formations jutted from the ground like frozen lightning. "Unless you count the riveting spectacle of watching crystals grow in real time, sir, it's been remarkably peaceful. Though I think I spotted a particularly aggressive piece of quartz earlier. Should I file a report?" "Smartass. Just keep your eyes open. Command's been picking up some weird energy signatures from the eastern canyons. Probably nothing, but you know how paranoid they get when anything registers above background radiation." The signal cut out with a burst of static, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts and the gentle hum of the planet's electromagnetic field that made his teeth itch if he thought about it too much. Kepler 442b wasn't the worst assignment he'd drawn in his 12-year military career, but it certainly wasn't winning any awards for excitement. The mining operation extracted rare earth elements that somehow managed to be both incredibly valuable and mind-numbingly boring to guard. His personal scanner chose that moment to emit a series of beeps that definitely weren't in the all clear category. Jake frowned at the display, watching as energy readings spiked and danced across the screen like a drunk mathematician's fever dream. The source appeared to be roughly 3 kilometers east, deep in a canyon system that the geological surveys had labeled structurally inadvisable for human exploration. Which, naturally, made it exactly the sort of place where interesting things happened. Jake keyed his comm unit. "Rodriguez, I'm picking up those energy signatures you mentioned. Whatever's out there, it's putting out enough juice to power half the colony." "Negative, Morrison. Stay on your designated route. Last thing we need is you wandering off and becoming a cautionary tale for the next batch of recruits. Sir, with respect, if something's crashed out there, it might need assistance. And if it hasn't crashed yet, it might be planning to crash into us." A pause that lasted long enough for Jake to wonder if his lieutenant was weighing the paperwork involved in either scenario. "Maintain radio contact and try not to do anything that would require me to explain your creative interpretation of orders to Colonel Hartwell." Jake was already moving toward the canyon before the transmission ended, because sometimes asking for forgiveness was significantly more expedient than asking for permission. The crystalline formations grew taller and more elaborate as he approached the eastern ridgeline, their surfaces reflecting the dying sunlight in patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't potentially concealing unknown energy sources. The descent into the canyon required careful navigation around mineral deposits that could slice through his environmental suit if he wasn't careful. The scanner readings grew stronger with each step, accompanied by an odd harmonic vibration that seemed to emanate from the crystal walls themselves. Jake had experienced enough strange phenomena during his frontier postings to know that odd usually preceded catastrophic by roughly 10 minutes. He found the crash site in a clearing where the crystal formations formed a natural amphitheater. The ship, if that's what the twisted metal sculpture had been before its violent encounter with local geology, was unlike anything in Jake's considerable experience with spacecraft design. Its hull appeared to be some sort of biometallic composite that shifted between silver and deep blue depending on the viewing angle, and what remained of its surface was covered in patterns that looked more grown than manufactured. Smoke rose from multiple hull breaches, carrying a scent that reminded Jake of ozone and something floral he couldn't identify. The craft's rear section had been completely separated from the main body, revealing internal structures that pulsed with fading bioluminescent light. Whatever power source had been driving this thing was clearly in the process of giving up the ghost, and experience suggested that alien power sources rarely failed quietly. Jake activated his suit's recording function and approached the main hull breach, his rifle raised but not quite aimed. "Rodriguez, I've got a confirmed crash site. Unknown vessel, design characteristics. Well, let's just say this isn't in any identification manual I've studied." Static answered him, which either meant the crystal formations were interfering with communications or his lieutenant was having another one of his legendary coffee-related cardiac episodes. Either way, Jake was on his own with what was increasingly obviously not human technology. The breach in the hull was large enough to walk through without ducking, which Jake appreciated because crawling into mysterious alien wreckage struck him as the sort of activity that led to uncomfortable conversations with commanding officers. The interior was a maze of twisted conduits and surfaces that curved in ways that made his eyes water if he looked at them too long. Emergency lighting cast everything in a pale blue glow that pulsed in rhythm with what might have been the ship's dying heartbeat. He found her in what had probably been the vessel's command section, pinned beneath a fallen structural beam that his scanner identified as some sort of crystalline composite. She was small, maybe 8 or 9 years old if human development patterns applied, and unconscious. Her skin had a pale luminescence that matched the ship's emergency lighting, and her hair was a shade of silver that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. But it was the ears that made Jake's worldview do a complete somersault. They were pointed, elongated, and definitely not standard human equipment. "Well," he muttered, setting his rifle aside and activating his suit's cutting laser, "this is either going to be the most interesting report I've ever filed, or the last report I ever file. Possibly both." The beam that had trapped her was too heavy to lift manually, but the cutting laser made short work of the crystalline material. Jake worked quickly, acutely aware that the ship's power fluctuations were becoming more erratic with each passing minute. When he finally freed her and lifted her carefully in his arms, he was surprised by how light she felt, as if her bones were hollow like a bird's. Her blood, he noticed with the sort of detached professional interest that military training encouraged, was definitely not red. The ship's death throes began just as Jake reached the hull breach, a harmonic wailing that made the crystal formations around the crash site resonate in sympathy. He ran, carrying his unconscious passenger through the canyon with the sound of failing alien technology providing an appropriately dramatic soundtrack to what he was beginning to suspect would be remembered as either the best or worst day of his military career. The explosion, when it came, lit up the canyon like a miniature sun and sent Jake diving behind a crystal formation that probably wasn't adequate cover but was the best option available on short notice. Debris rained down around them, most of it burning in colors that definitely weren't in any standard physics textbook. When the light show ended and Jake's ears stopped ringing, he looked down at the small figure in his arms and wondered exactly how he was going to explain this to Lieutenant Rodriguez. "Kid," he said quietly, "I really hope you're worth the paperwork this is going to generate." Dr. Sarah Voss had seen plenty of unusual cases during her 15 years as chief medical officer at Mining Station Echo 7, but none that had quite prepared her for Jake Morrison walking into her medical bay carrying what appeared to be a child with ears that belonged in a fantasy novel. She paused in her inventory of surgical supplies, coffee mug halfway to her lips, and stared at the unconscious figure in Jake's arms. "Please tell me this is some sort of elaborate practical joke," she said, setting down her mug with. Dr. Sarah Voss had seen plenty of unusual cases during her 15 years as chief medical officer at Mining Station Echo 7, but none that had quite prepared her for Jake Morrison walking into her medical bay carrying what appeared to be a child with ears that belonged in a fantasy novel. She paused in her inventory of surgical supplies, coffee mug halfway to her lips, and stared at the unconscious figure in Jake's arms. "Please tell me this is some sort of elaborate practical joke," she said, setting down her mug with the careful precision of someone who had already consumed enough caffeine to power a small shuttle. "Because if it's not, I'm going to need significantly more coffee and possibly a career change." Jake carefully placed the child on the examination table, where the overhead bioscanners immediately began their electronic symphony of confusion. "I wish I could," document found her in a crashed ship about 3 clicks east. The vessel wasn't exactly standard issue, if you catch my meaning. Sarah activated her diagnostic equipment and watched as the readings painted a picture that challenged everything she'd learned in medical school. The child's cellular structure appeared fundamentally human, but with modifications that made her scanners emit sounds normally reserved for critical system failures. "Jake, I hate to break this to you, but my medical databases are having what I can only describe as an electronic nervous breakdown. Her DNA is reading as approximately 97% human, but that remaining 3% is throwing up error codes I've never seen before." "The years were kind of a giveaway that she's not exactly local," Jake replied, settling into a chair that creaked under his weight. "Any idea what that blue stuff she's bleeding is supposed to be?" "Well, it's definitely not hemoglobin," Sarah said, running a spectrographic analysis that produced results requiring creative interpretation. "The good news is that it appears to carry oxygen just fine. The bad news is that I have absolutely no idea how to treat injuries in someone whose circulatory system operates on principles that aren't in any textbook I own." The child stirred on the examination table, silver eyelashes fluttering as consciousness returned. When her eyes opened, they were a luminous violet that seemed to contain depth impossible in normal human irises. She looked around the medical bay with obvious confusion before her gaze settled on Jake. "You are the one who carried me from the wreckage," she said, her voice carrying a musical quality that somehow translated directly into understanding without passing through Jake's ears first. "I am Princess Lyralii of the Aetherian Empire. You have my gratitude, human warrior." Jake blinked several times, wondering if the canyon's crystal formations had somehow affected his hearing. Did her voice just bypass my auditory system entirely? "Telepathic communication interface," Lyralii explained, sitting up on the examination table with surprising grace for someone who had recently been unconscious in a crashed spacecraft. "My people developed it for interspecies contact. Though I must admit, your mental patterns are quite different from what our scholars predicted for humans." Sarah looked back and forth between them, her expression suggesting she was rapidly approaching her daily limit for impossible things before breakfast. "Right. Telepathic alien princess. Of course. Because why should this day be simple?" She took a long drink of coffee and activated her recording equipment. "For the medical record, patient claims to be royalty from an unknown stellar empire and is communicating via direct neural interface." "I'm going to need so much more coffee." "Your healer seems distressed," Lyralii observed, her pointed ears tilting slightly as she focused on Sarah. "Perhaps I should explain that my injuries are already healing. My people possess accelerated cellular regeneration capabilities." Indeed, the cuts and bruises that had covered the child's arms were already fading, leaving behind unblemished skin that glowed with subtle luminescence. Sarah's bioscanners registered the healing process in real time, producing readings that made her question whether her equipment had been compromised by cosmic radiation. "Accelerated healing," Sarah muttered, making notes that would either revolutionize medicine or get her committed to a psychiatric facility. Of course. Why wouldn't the alien princess have supernatural recovery abilities? "Next you'll tell me she can fly." "Actually, flight requires specialized environmental suits and gravitic manipulation technology," Lyralii said seriously. "Though I appreciate your assumption of our capabilities." Jake found himself grinning despite the surreal nature of the conversation. "Kid, I like you already. Any chance you could explain why your ship was playing tag with whatever shot you down?" "Because I'm fairly certain they weren't finished with their conversation." Lyralii's expression darkened, and the luminescence of her skin dimmed noticeably. "Void hunters. Pirates who prey on vessels traveling the deep space routes between star systems. They attacked my diplomatic transport while I was en route to establish preliminary contact protocols with your people." "Wait," Sarah interrupted, nearly dropping her coffee mug. "Contact protocols? As in first contact? As in we're about to become the subject of interstellar diplomatic incidents?" "The Aetherian Empire has been aware of human expansion into this galactic sector for several of your decades," Lyralii explained patiently. "My mother, Queen Selenia, decided the time had come for formal introduction. Unfortunately, the Void Hunters have been tracking diplomatic vessels, hoping to capture high-value targets for ransom." Jake felt a cold certainty settling in his stomach. These void hunters. Would they happen to be the type to follow crash sites and finish what they started? Regrettably, yes. Captain Korath, their leader, has particular interest in capturing members of royal families. The bounty on my safe return would fund their operations for years. Sarah set down her coffee mug with finality. Right. So we've gone from routine medical treatment to potential interstellar incident with armed pirates en route. Jake, please tell me you've got some sort of plan that doesn't involve all of us becoming statistics in someone else's war. I've got a plan, Jake said, standing and checking his sidearm. It might not be a good plan, but it's definitely a plan. First step is getting word to Rodriguez that we need to upgrade our defensive posture from board security patrol to imminent hostile contact. Your military installations are not equipped for combat with Void Hunter technology, Lyralii said quietly. Their ships carry plasma cannons capable of reducing your mining facility to constituent atoms. Well, that's encouraging, Jake replied. Any chance your people are sending a rescue party? My escape pod's distress beacon was damaged in the crash. Without it, locating me in this stellar region could take standard weeks, even with our advanced scanning technology. Sarah activated the medical bay's communication system, her voice carrying the brisk efficiency of someone who had decided to treat impossible situations as routine medical emergencies. All station personnel, this is medical. We have a potential hostile contact situation developing. Recommend immediate implementation of emergency protocols. The response came through static-filled speakers in Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice, though his usual casual profanity had been replaced by military precision. Medical, confirmed. Long-range sensors are picking up multiple contacts approaching the system. ETA approximately 6 hours. Jake looked at Lyralii, who was now sitting cross-legged on the examination table with the composure of someone much older than her apparent age. Princess, I don't suppose your people packed any useful technology in that escape pod? Maybe something that could even the odds a little. The pod's emergency systems include basic defensive capabilities, she said thoughtfully. However, the power core was damaged in the crash. Repairs would require compatible energy sources. Define compatible, Sarah said, already moving toward her equipment cabinets. Crystalline matrices capable of channeling bioelectric energy. Your planet's natural formations might be adaptable, though the conversion process would require direct neural interface. Jake and Sarah exchanged glances that conveyed volumes about their respective comfort levels with alien technology and direct neural interfaces. Doc, Jake said finally, remember how you were asking for more coffee? I think we're going to need to upgrade to something significantly stronger. Lyralii smiled, the expression transforming her young features and making her seem both more human and more alien simultaneously. I believe your expression is, buckle up. The first sign that Jake's day was about to transition from diplomatically complicated to explosively catastrophic came when the colony's defense grid started screaming warnings loud enough to wake anyone who had somehow managed to sleep through the previous excitement. He was in the middle of explaining to Colonel Hartwell via emergency comm link why harboring an alien princess seemed like a reasonable tactical decision when every alarm on mining station Echo 7 decided to have a simultaneous nervous breakdown. Morrison, Colonel Hartwell's voice crackled through the static, please tell me those readings are some sort of equipment malfunction and not what they appear to be. Jake glanced at the tactical display where 5 distinct contacts were approaching the system at velocities that violated several laws of physics he remembered from basic training. Sir, I wish I could, but unless our sensors have developed a collective sense of humor, we've got incoming hostiles that make our defense capabilities look like harsh language and pointed sticks. Outstanding, the colonel replied with the sort of calm that suggested he was either remarkably composed or had suffered a complete psychological break. Estimated time to contact. Approximately 90 minutes, sir. Though Princess Lyralii suggests they might take their time and announce their intentions dramatically. Apparently, intimidation is part of their standard operating procedure. Lyralii looked up from where she had been examining the colony's power distribution systems with the intense concentration of someone trying to solve a three-dimensional puzzle while blindfolded. Captain Korath enjoys theatrical presentations. He will likely demand my surrender in terms designed to demonstrate his superiority over what he considers primitive technology. Lieutenant Rodriguez burst into the command center, his uniform suggesting he had dressed hastily and his expression indicating that coffee had not yet restored his faith in the universe. Morrison, please tell me you have some sort of master plan that doesn't involve us becoming historical footnotes in someone else's war memoir. Actually, I might, Jake said, gesturing toward the display showing the colony's mining laser array. Those industrial cutters weren't designed for combat, but with a few creative modifications and Princess Lyralii's help with the power routing. You want to turn mining equipment into weapons? Rodriguez interrupted. That's either brilliant or insane. I'm hoping for both, Jake replied. Princess, those bioelectric interfaces you mentioned. Could you interface with our power systems and reroute energy from the mining operation to the laser array? Lyralii moved to the primary control console with fluid grace that made Jake wonder if all her people moved like dancers or if royal training included specialized locomotion techniques. Your systems are remarkably straightforward compared to Etherian technology. Yes, I can redirect power flow, though the process will require direct neural contact with your computer networks. Define direct neural contact, Rodriguez said with the expression of someone who suspected the answer would require forms he didn't want to fill out. I place my hands on the interface and allow my bioelectric field to merge with your electronic systems, Lyralii explained, approaching the main console. There may be some minor electromagnetic effects. The moment her fingers touched the control panel, every electronic device in the command center flickered in unison, the lights dimmed to half intensity, and Jake's tactical scanner began displaying readouts in what appeared to be alien script before returning to normal readings that were significantly more optimistic than they had been moments before. Well, Rodriguez observed, that was either very impressive or very terrifying. Possibly both. The mining laser array, according to the updated tactical display, was now operating at roughly 300% of normal capacity and had somehow acquired targeting systems that hadn't existed 5 minutes earlier. Jake watched power readings that suggested the colony's reactors were being pushed beyond design specifications in ways that would either revolutionize energy distribution or result in spectacular explosions. Princess, he said carefully, exactly how much did you just modify our systems? I optimized power flow efficiency and implemented basic targeting algorithms, she replied, her silver hair now carrying a faint luminescent charge that made her look like she had been touched by controlled lightning. Your laser array should now be capable of engaging targets at significantly increased ranges with improved accuracy. The communication system chose that moment to broadcast a message that filled the command center with a voice that sounded like someone had taught Gravel to speak with pretentious authority. Inhabitants of the mining facility, this is Captain Korath of the Void Hunter Fleet. You will surrender the Etherian royal currently sheltering within your installation, or we will demonstrate why resistance to our demands is inadvisable. Jake activated the response system with the sort of grim smile that suggested he had been waiting for this particular conversation. Captain Korath, this is Sergeant Morrison of the Colonial Defense Force. I'm afraid your request conflicts with our hospitality policies. Perhaps you'd like to schedule an appointment and discuss this like civilized beings. Laughter echoed through the speakers, carrying undertones that suggested Korath found human optimism amusing in the way predators might appreciate particularly entertaining prey. Sergeant Morrison, your primitive weapons are incapable of threatening vessels equipped with military-grade shielding and plasma cannons. Surrender the princess, and your deaths will be swift. That's remarkably considerate of you, Jake replied, but I'm afraid we'll have to decline. We've grown quite fond of Princess Lyralii, and our recent equipment upgrades have improved our negotiating position. Equipment upgrades? Koratha's voice carried a note of genuine curiosity. What could miners possibly have accomplished that would concern a Void Hunter fleet? Rodriguez was monitoring the tactical display where the 5 hostile contacts had moved into attack formation around the colony. Jake, they're charging weapons. Whatever we're going to do, now would be an excellent time. Princess, are you ready to demonstrate why underestimating human stubbornness is a tactical error? Jake asked, moving to the firing control station. Sergeant Morrison, Lyralii said formally, it would be my honor to assist in teaching these pirates the value of proper manners. The first Void Hunter attack came as a probing strike, plasma bolts designed to test the colony's defenses while demonstrating the futility of resistance. The shots impacted the mining station's outer shields with brilliant flashes that would have been beautiful if they hadn't been trying to kill everyone inside. Jake activated the modified laser array, watching as targeting information flowed across his display in patterns that his training had never covered but somehow made perfect sense. Rodriguez, remember when you complained that this assignment was too quiet? I take it back, Rodriguez replied, monitoring damage control systems. I officially prefer quiet. The mining lasers, enhanced by Ethereum modifications, lanced out toward the attacking ships with precision that surprised everyone, including Jake. The first beam struck a Void Hunter escort directly in what appeared to be its main drive section, causing an explosion that lit up the space around the colony like a brief artificial star. Karatha's voice returned to the communication system, though the amused confidence had been replaced by something approaching respect. Interesting. Your miners appear to have developed unexpected capabilities. However, one ship destroyed changes nothing. Actually, Jake said, adjusting the targeting system for the next volley, we've got 4 more charges in this array, and Princess Lyralii has been making additional improvements while you were talking. Care to test our hospitality further? The response came in the form of coordinated plasma cannon fire from the remaining 4 ships, a barrage that would have reduced the mining station to component atoms if the colony's shields hadn't been mysteriously reinforced by Ethereum technology. The impact sent tremors through the station that made coffee mugs dance across tables and forced everyone to grab whatever stable surfaces were available. Shields holding at 60%, Rodriguez reported, his voice carrying the sort of professional calm that suggested either excellent training or complete psychological detachment. Whatever the princess did to our defensive systems, it's keeping us alive. Lyralii looked up from the console where she had been maintaining her neural interface with the colony's systems, her silver eyes now glowing with contained energy. The crystalline formations beneath your station are excellent conductors for bioelectric fields. I have been using them to distribute defensive energy more efficiently. You turned our entire geological foundation into a defensive grid? Jake asked, firing another laser burst that caught a second Void Hunter ship in what he hoped was a critical system. That's either incredibly clever or incredibly dangerous. Both, Lyralii admitted cheerfully. Though the energy expenditure is considerable. I can maintain these modifications for perhaps another hour before requiring rest. The second ship that Jake had targeted was now drifting away from the formation, trailing plasma and debris in patterns that suggested its main weapons had been permanently disabled. Karatha's voice returned to the speakers, though the pretentious authority had been replaced by grudging acknowledgement of changed circumstances. Sergeant Morrison, you have proven more resourceful than anticipated. However, you merely delay the inevitable. My remaining ships carry sufficient firepower to reduce your installation to rubble. Captain Karath, Jake replied, targeting the third ship while Lyralii continued her electronic symphony with the colony's systems. You might want to check your long-range sensors before committing to that course of action. The silence that followed lasted long enough for Jake to wonder if he had been bluffing more successfully than intended. When Karatha's voice returned, it carried undertones that suggested the pirate captain was discovering that this day was not proceeding according to plan. That is impossible, Karath said finally. Etherean military vessels do not patrol this sector. Princess Lyralii smiled, the expression transforming her young features with satisfaction that suggested excellent timing. Captain Karath, I believe you are about to meet my mother. The space around mining station Echo 7 lit up with the arrival of a ship that made the Void Hunter vessels look like toys built by enthusiastic children. The Etherean dreadnought materialized from what Jake could only describe as controlled folding of spacetime, its bioluminescent hull stretching for what appeared to be several kilometers and radiating power signatures that made the colony's sensors recalibrate their measurement scales. "Well," Rodriguez observed quietly, "that's either very good news or very bad news. Given that the remaining Void Hunter ships are currently accelerating away from here at velocities that suggest panic," Jake replied, "I'm going to vote for good news." Captain Karatha's final transmission carried the sort of dignified retreat that suggested he had learned valuable lessons about underestimating both human persistence and royal rescue operations. "This encounter is concluded, Sergeant Morrison. However, our business with the Etherian Empire is far from finished." Jake watched the tactical display as the 3 surviving Void Hunter ships disappeared into hyperspace, leaving behind only debris and the sort of story that would either get him promoted or assigned to psychological evaluation. "Princess," he said finally, "I think it's time I met your mother." Queen Selenia of the Etherian Empire possessed the sort of presence that made Jake instinctively check his uniform for wrinkles despite knowing it had been pressed exactly once in the past 6 months. She materialized in the colony's main hangar bay via a transportation method that involved considerably more light and considerably less walking than Jake was accustomed to, accompanied by an entourage that somehow managed to look both diplomatic and capable of reducing the mining station to its component atoms if negotiations went poorly. "Your Majesty," Jake said, executing what he hoped was an appropriate bow for someone whose understanding of royal protocol came entirely from historical documentaries and action movies, "welcome to Mining Station Echo 7. I apologize for the accommodations, but we weren't expecting interstellar royalty when we built this place." The Queen's response was a smile that suggested she found human attempts at formal courtesy endearing rather than offensive. Like her daughter, she possessed the elongated ears and luminescent skin that marked her as definitively non-human, but her bearing carried an authority that transcended species boundaries. "Sergeant Morrison, your protection of my daughter has earned you far more consideration than any accommodation could provide." Lyralii stepped forward, her recent interface with the colony's systems having left her hair with a faint electric charge that made her look like she had been touched by controlled lightning. "Mother, Sergeant Morrison and his people defended me against Void Hunter attack despite having no obligation to become involved in Etherian affairs." "Indeed," Queen Selenia replied, her violet eyes focusing on Jake with an intensity that suggested she was reading considerably more than his surface thoughts. "Which brings me to a proposition that may surprise you, Sergeant Morrison." Jake glanced at Lieutenant Rodriguez, who was maintaining the sort of professional composure that suggested he had decided to treat alien royalty as just another unusual duty assignment. "Ma'am, given that my last 24 hours have included crashed spaceships, telepathic communication, and energy weapons that shouldn't exist, I'm prepared for most surprises. My daughter requires a guardian," the Queen continued, "someone capable of protecting her during diplomatic missions and understanding both human and Etherian perspectives. Your actions have demonstrated qualities that our traditional selection processes rarely identify." Dr. Sarah Voss, who had been quietly monitoring the conversation while running medical scans on alien physiology that challenged every textbook she owned, looked up from her equipment with the expression of someone who had decided that impossible things were becoming routine. "Are you offering Jake a job, Your Majesty? Because I have to warn you, he's terrible at following standard procedures." "That particular quality," Queen Selenia said with amusement, "is precisely why the position would suit him. Standard procedures rarely account for the sort of creative problem-solving that yesterday's events required." Jake found himself considering an offer that would have been impossible to imagine when he woke up that morning. "Your Majesty, with respect, I'm not sure my qualifications include intergalactic diplomacy. My specialty is more along the lines of creative applications of military equipment and what my commanding officers generally call improvised solutions to complex problems." "Those skills," Lyralii interjected, "proved quite effective when applied to Void Hunter combat tactics. I believe the human expression is, thinking outside the box." The position would include comprehensive education in Etherian science, technology, and diplomatic protocols, Queen Selenia explained. "Our medical technology could address the injuries you sustained during your previous military service, and our educational interfaces would provide knowledge that might interest someone with your demonstrated adaptability." Rodriguez cleared his throat with the careful precision of someone who suspected he was about to become part of a historical moment. Jake, are you seriously considering leaving the Colonial Defense Force to become an alien diplomat? Rodriguez, Jake replied, 6 months ago, the most exotic thing I expected to encounter out here was unusual mineral formations. Now I'm being offered the chance to learn about civilizations that span multiple star systems and technology that makes our best equipment look like stone tools. How exactly does someone turn down an opportunity like that? The transition would not require abandoning your human identity, Queen Selenia assured him. The Aetherian Empire values diversity of perspective, particularly when establishing relationships with newly contacted species. Your human understanding would be invaluable in future diplomatic initiatives. Dr. Voss looked up from her medical scanner, which had been providing readings on Aetherian physiology that would revolutionize her understanding of biology if she survived long enough to publish them. Jake, speaking as your medical officer, I have to point out that alien medical technology might actually fix the knee injury you've been pretending doesn't bother you for the past 3 years. You noticed that? Jake asked, surprised. I'm a doctor, not a miracle worker, but I'm not blind either. And according to these readings, Aetherian regenerative medicine could have you back to full physical capacity within weeks. Lyralii moved to stand beside her mother, her silver eyes bright with the sort of enthusiasm that suggested she had already decided how this conversation should conclude. Sergeant Morrison, I would be honored to have you as my guardian. Your protection has already saved my life once, and I believe we could accomplish significant things together. Jake looked around the hangar bay where this impossible conversation was taking place, taking in the faces of people who had become more than colleagues during their shared experience. Rodriguez wore the expression of someone trying to maintain military bearing while processing career changes that weren't covered in any regulation manual. Dr. Voss had the focused intensity of someone whose entire understanding of medicine was being rewritten by alien technology. Colonel Hartwell, participating via communication link, maintained the sort of professional silence that suggested he was either composing commendation reports or transfer orders. Your Majesty, Jake said finally, if I accept this position, what happens to the people here? Because these folks took considerable risks helping me protect your daughter, and I prefer that their reward not include being forgotten by interstellar politics. Queen Selenia's smile suggested she had been expecting this question. The Aetherian Empire is interested in establishing formal diplomatic relations with humanity. Mining Station Echo 7 would become our initial embassy, with appropriate technological and medical support for its personnel. Your friends would become the first human ambassadors to our civilization. So we get alien technology, advanced medical treatment, and job security that extends beyond this mining operation? Rodriguez asked. Jake, if you don't take this offer, I'm going to assume you've suffered some sort of head injury. Dr. Voss nodded enthusiastically. The research opportunities alone would advance human medicine by centuries. Jake, I'll never forgive you if you pass this up. Colonel Hartwell's voice crackled through the communication system with the sort of official approval that suggested he had been monitoring this conversation with considerable interest. Morrison, the Colonial Defense Force hereby grants you extended leave for diplomatic assignment. Try not to start any interstellar wars. Jake found himself grinning at the absurdity of a career change that involved leaving military service to become guardian to an alien princess whose people possessed technology that seemed like magic and knowledge that spanned star systems. 6 months ago, his biggest concern had been whether the coffee supply would last until the next supply shipment. Princess Lyralii, he said formally, it would be my honor to serve as your guardian. Though I should warn you that my diplomatic experience is limited to persuading Void Hunter pirates that attacking us was inadvisable. Those particular diplomatic skills may prove quite useful, Queen Selenia observed. The galaxy contains numerous individuals who respond better to practical demonstrations than theoretical negotiations. Lyralii's smile transformed her young features with pure joy. Sergeant Morrison, I believe this is the beginning of adventures that will surprise both our peoples. Jake, he corrected gently. If we're going to be traveling together across star systems, formal titles seem unnecessarily complicated. Jake, she repeated, testing the name with the sort of careful pronunciation that suggested she was committing it to memory. I like it. It sounds like someone who would rescue alien princesses from crashed spaceships. 3 weeks later, Jake stood on the observation deck of the Etherian dreadnought watching stars whirl past at velocities that his human brain couldn't quite process, wearing clothing made from materials that felt like silk but could apparently stop plasma cannon fire. His knee, thanks to Etherian medical technology, no longer reminded him of every poor decision he had made during 12 years of military service. His understanding of physics had been thoroughly revolutionized by educational interfaces that made learning feel like downloading knowledge directly into his consciousness. But the most significant change was less tangible. For the first time in years, Jake Morrison felt like he was part of something larger than routine patrols and maintenance schedules. Princess Lyralii had proven to be intelligent, curious, and possessed of a sense of humor that appreciated both human sarcasm and Etherian irony. Queen Selenia had kept her promises about education and medical treatment, but more importantly, she had treated him as a valued advisor rather than simply hired protection. Jake, Lyralii said, appearing beside him at the observation window with the sort of quiet movement that suggested royal training included advanced stealth techniques, we will be arriving at the Centauri embassy in approximately 6 hours. Are you prepared for your first formal diplomatic function? Princess, Jake replied, watching a nebula that painted space in colors that didn't exist in human language. After the past month, I'm prepared for anything. Though I should probably mention that my formal dinner experience is limited to military mess halls and that one time I attended my sister's wedding. I believe you will adapt admirably, she said with confidence that suggested she had faith in his ability to learn diplomatic protocols without causing interstellar incidents. Though I should warn you that Centauri diplomats enjoy testing new representatives with complicated questions about trade agreements. Well, Jake said, grinning at the sort of challenge that would have terrified him a month ago, it's a good thing I've had excellent teachers. Besides, how complicated could interstellar trade negotiations possibly be? Lyralii's laughter carried the musical quality that still made Jake marvel at the universe's capacity for impossible things becoming routine. Jake, I believe that question demonstrates why human perspectives will prove invaluable to Etherian diplomacy. Outside the observation window, stars continued their ancient dance across distances that dwarfed human understanding, carrying a former mining station security guard toward adventures that would have been impossible to imagine when his biggest concern was whether the coffee supply would last until the next shipment. Jake Morrison had discovered that sometimes the most extraordinary opportunities came disguised as routine patrol duties, and that protecting someone worth protecting could change everything about what seemed possible. Princess, he said quietly, remind me to send a thank you note to whoever scheduled my patrol route that day. Already done, she replied with a smile that suggested alien royalty understood human sentiment better than most humans expected. Though I believe the proper expression is that some meetings are written in the stars. Jake decided that alien royalty definitely understood human sentiment, and that his new career was going to be significantly more interesting than his old one.